like you, I constantly think about the justice system and, AI is the flavor of the day and how can AI impact the justice system. If you're passionate about developing and modernizing a more efficient, effective, and accessible justice system, I think AI and Gen AI in particular can really help us out here.
Is AI about to revolutionize the justice system? Welcome to Clarity on Tech, a podcast powered by the Thomson Reuters Institute. I'm Zach Warren, the Institute's Technology and Innovation Insights Lead. In each episode, we dive deep into the future of the legal, corporate, tax accounting and audit, and government communities. Today, we're exploring AI's impact on the future legal landscape and society at large. Will AI and other new technologies really have an impact on access to justice and the operations of courts? As part of our Courting Change series, here's TRI's Rabia Butler to introduce Judge Maritza Braswell and Judge Scott Schlegel, who discuss the far-reaching impact of the rapidly changing tech world on today's justice system.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Rabia Butler, your host, and today we seek to provide some clarity on how artificial intelligence is impacting the legal system and society, and what are new responsibilities and challenges faced by legal professionals in this evolving landscape. In this thought-provoking episode, we're honored to be joined by two distinguished judicial voices in the forefront of legal innovation, Judge Maritza Braswell and Judge Scott Schlegel. Drawing from their rich experiences in both trial and appellate court, these judicial thought leaders offer a unique perspective on how AI is reshaping not just our legal system, but our society as a whole. As artificial intelligence becomes more common in our everyday lives, from courtrooms to classrooms, we're faced with a big question about how legal systems should change. Today, we will hear about AI's potential to make justice more accessible, while also considering the ethical and practical challenges that come with it. So without further delay, let's begin our journey into Courting Change, AI's impact on society and the evolving legal landscape. Welcome, Judge Braswell and Judge Schlegel.
Thank you. I'm excited for this conversation. Judge Schlegel, this is going to be, I think, a fun one. I know you're deep into these issues, and I am too. And so it's fun to just kind of get to interact and talk about something we're both passionate about and constantly thinking about. All right. Well, let's dive in because I feel like you and I could talk about this stuff for hours, so we don't want to waste any time. One thing I really admire and appreciate about how you think on AI is that you think about it very expansively. You're not just thinking about it narrowly in terms of, where is it in the legal profession? How are we using it in the legal profession? You're thinking about it broadly, sort of what's the impact on society? How is it really going to change the way we think and interact with each other? And to that end, you wrote a really great blog post that I want to talk about today. And it's the one that analogizes AI in fully self-driving vehicles to AI in the judiciary, potentially in the future. You say something very specific that I want to unpack. You say, FSD behaves similarly whether it's clear skies or raining. That consistency can be a strength, but it's also a flaw. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, it's, like you, I constantly think about the justice system and, AI is the flavor of the day and how can AI impact the justice system. If you're passionate about developing and modernizing a more efficient, effective, and accessible justice system, I think AI and Gen AI in particular can really help us out here. But we really need to take a lot of precaution when going down this road. Not that I'm not an optimist. I'm all in. I'm enjoying it just like you. But we need to take a step back. When I was a first year associate at a big downtown firm, I would always run in with the answer and I would hand the partner, that he gave me an assignment. I'd give it to him and he'd go, God, I got to get you to see the trees around that one tree. I need you to see the forest. And I would that always stuck with me because, as you get older and more mature and understand the nuances, you see more and more trees. And I think right now we're in the Gen AI sees that one tree, that one task. And, it probably sees a few, but it doesn't see as much as you and I see. And so when I use the full self-driving example and, as my car was driving me to work, the other day, it really struck me on how this AI can impact the justice system if we're not paying attention. And what I said there was, all right, so I told it to go from point A to point B, and I kind of kicked back and relaxed and listened to the radio and get on the phone. But it doesn't do what I would do. So it might be traveling in the left lane where, look, I want to be in the right lane. Stop changing lanes. And at some point, it's a problem. At some point, it becomes an issue. At the very beginning, look, it's no big deal. I'm going to get to work. But what happens when it starts raining? Or, what happens when the road conditions change? And so the day after I was driving, and it started to rain. And it never changed its speed. It never got over sooner rather than later. So it treated the dry environment the same as the wet environment, whereas you and I would know, all right, exit's coming up. We should probably get over a lot sooner and reduce our speed, as opposed to, all right, the AI has just been doing it the same way, 35 miles per hour, get over at the 100-yard mark, as opposed to you and I might go to 20 and get over at the 300-yard mark. So it's those types of consistencies that are a strength, but it's also a weakness and can get us into a lot of trouble. The other part of that was the lack of vision. And so I take the same right, and that same bus gets in front of me every other day. The AI, it sees the bus. It doesn't see the bus. It gets over behind the bus. I don't know if it notices it's a bus or not, but I know that bus is going to stop. Don't get behind that bus. Wait for it to stop and go around it. But the AI, of course, went right behind the bus. And, from my perspective, again, it lacks that vision, that overarching vision that we so desperately need.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. This idea that, we can anticipate things based on certain experiences. Obviously, AIs are trained on data. And so in some respect, they anticipate things, but in other respects, not sort of being in touch with the world around them and having the same experiences that we have, full experiences that we have, sensory and otherwise, can't really anticipate certain things. And so the decision making is certainly different than the decision making we can do.
Yeah. And, to the point, most of the time it's going to be fine, but we're in the justice system. And so that it's going to be fine part. What happens when it's not? What happens when it missed that look that you got from that husband or the wife when you're going, what, that look or that demeanor or that nuance that I caught from doing this over and over again means, they're not getting the kids this weekend. And, I don't want to turn that over to Grok or Gen or ChatGPT. Human judgment's way too important for things like that, in my perspective.
Let me stay on this analogy because, again, I think it's a really good one. You note on this lane changing point, right? And it's true. I've experienced that where even when you put it on the setting that says minimal lane changes, it's still like wanting to change lanes all the time.
Yeah.
And you say in your blog post, at some point, I sort of give into it, right? At some point, it's like, I'm going to stop fighting the lane change inclination and let it change lanes when it wants to, as long as it's not creating some hazard or danger. I'll just let it do what it wants to do.
Yeah.
And you analogize that to maybe, I guess, what I would call over-reliance or, weariness in terms of resisting the AI's inclination and sort of the dangers of that, right? The danger of saying, you know what, it's too hard to kind of redirect this AI. Let me just let it do it. Talk to me about the dangers you foresee in that sort of wariness when it comes to reliance on AI in the legal profession or the justice system.
Yeah, again, it goes back to this whole notion of who's in control and when you give over control, how important is that control? And so, I'm just trying to get to work. Yeah, it's annoying to me. And at some point, it's like, I just give up. I know it's going to get me there. I know it's going to get me there safely, but I'm just tired of fighting my preference over the car's preference. That doesn't matter to that much extent when I'm trying to get to work. But when you and I are busy, again, I was on the trial court, you're on the trial court. When you just have 100 cases and you just got to get through all the cases, if you're not paying attention to those quote unquote lane changes in the judicial setting, that could be dangerous. You can get too accustomed to the way it drives as opposed to the way that you drive. And your voice really matters when it comes to the judgment on what we look in and day out. I don't want the day where judges start going, you know what, it's not the way I would do it, but I'm gonna allow this big tech company to decide which direction the justice system goes or what lane the justice system should be in. There is a black box. We don't know what the real answers are, and not one of us that's talking about this doesn't think that a company, I'm not talking about anybody specific, a company doesn't have a bent, or it might have a bent and it might have a direction on how it's training it. If you play with the different models, they all have a different feel to them. Mm-hmm. And so who's to say that lane change or what lane to take doesn't change over time based upon some big tech aristocracy, and they decide to go. And to me, that's not the justice system. So just be careful is my point. Be careful not to over rely upon any of these Gen AI tools, because it can get you in trouble. If you're intentionally using them day in and day out, you'll be fine. Just like I think any good judge has 100 of the same type of criminal case over and over and over again. And a good judge understands it's not just any case. It's a very particular case with a very particular victim, with a very particular defendant. And each case needs to matter. And it's not just some broad stroke, it's a peewit cocaine, it's a armed robbery. No, it's very specific each and every time. And I think you can use the same type of analogy.
That leads me to a point that's bouncing around in my head. And often when we talk about AI risks, because they're real, they can be big, they're serious, but isn't it similar to other risks that we're always dealing with? I mean, I think about, for example, implicit bias, and not to take us totally off course on a topic that, we could talk about for a separate hour. But, implicit bias is one of those things. We all have them. We all have certain sort of inclinations and biases. And as judges, I think it's truly our job to interrupt those biases, right? And make sure that they are not overly influencing a particular decision, that we sort of take a step back and think, is this auto inclination, right, that's sort of driving my decision, or is my decision here really reasoned? Isn't that essentially the same thing? We sort of have to constantly interrupt whatever might be coming at us from an AI and say, is this sort of the AI's inclination, or is this me truly reasoning through this and making a decision assisted by this technology, but me making this decision? Is it really dissimilar?
Yeah, I mean, we have this argument where people say, well, technology is biased, and we always push back, well, people are biased. And so you get that back and forth, and I get that. But the distinction is, you can come after me. You can say Judge Schlegel is the worst judge that ever existed. You can take me up. You can, run somebody against me. There are so many things that you can do. And it's different when I say it and give you reasons, as opposed to the black box that quote unquote says it and gives it to you and didn't really understand it. And, I always push back on this notion of whose singularity you're training for. You're never going to get rid of a quote unquote bias. And then we get to the existential question is, what is justice, right? I mean, in my community, a sentence might be just, where in another community, that sentence might be unjust. And a bail decision in one community may be made because there are additional resources in one community where another community might not have those types of resources. So therefore, the decisions are different. And so that might not be a bias. It might be a reality on the ground. And so if you're building a singularity, how do you take into account all those different factors that a human judge must take into consideration before making a decision?
You're touching on some really, I think, interesting points that are coming up a lot in the context of talking about AI, but maybe not expressly being talked about. One is accountability, right? So once you start embedding AI into systems, into workflows, into processes, relying on it, how does the sort of accountability dynamic change? And the other is transparency. Like, should we be telling people expressly, overtly, every time AI is being used, so that there's greater sort of confidence, right? That there's real transparency and therefore increasing public trust. Let's talk about that first one, accountability. From your perspective, how does that accountability framework or equation change, or does it at all? I mean, we see hallucination stories, right? Lawyers submitting briefs with hallucinated cases or misquoted cases. Shouldn't the lawyers still be held accountable individually, even if they are relying on technology, or does the accountability equation change from your perspective?
No, the accountability does not change from my perspective. It's the person who's controlling the tool that's the one that's going to be held accountable. Just again, if you were to sign a first year associate's memorandum of in support of a motion for summary judgment and you sign it as if it's your own, well, it's yours. I don't care that, you used a first year associate or a paralegal or anyone else for that matter. You signed it. It's your work product. And so I think it's the same thing for the use of Gen AI. The more interesting question that I have, though, is now that I'm on the Court of Appeal, what should be the standard of review as trial court judges begin to use it more frequently? So if I build a box that says, essentially calls balls and strikes on objection. So there's an objection made and the LLM is running and it hears and it goes, green light, sustain the objection, red light, overrule the objection. And it cites to you, a code of evidence to give you the thing. Am I now going to give you abuse of discretion on the bot's balls and strike calls? No, I don't think so. And if everything has to go to a de novo review because you're using an LLM to help you through whether or not this law and these fact patterns applied, and it's not a manifest erroneous type standard of review, if it goes to de novo, I quit. I'm not doing de novo for every ruling that a trial court uses now when they're using a Gen AI tool.
That's a great. So this is what I meant when we started, which is I really like how you think expansively, and you're talking about tools that we don't have right now. We're not using those tools, but you're kind of thinking ahead, right? What could come in the future, and how does the landscape change, and how does the work that we're doing change? And I appreciate that about you. So let's stay on that thread about it changing. Do you think the partnership between humans and AI is going to transform just general notions of responsibility, kind of along what we're talking about here, right? As more decision making, not just, I don't mean in the legal profession necessarily, but in society, people handing off decisions to AI, people relying on AI. There's studies that show that certain generations actually rely on AI for really big decisions, big life decisions as advisors. Does that start to change notions of responsibility, do you think, in society?
I think it's going to. I think it's beginning to creep into every area. I mean, we have wrongful termination suits that are being filed. We have sexual harassment suits being filed based upon, deep fake type evidence. But the more interesting one that I have is, to your point, the decision making. Are we going to have to change what's the standards for medical malpractice and whether or not somebody breached their professional standard of care when the AI was shouting, do this, do this, do this, and the nurse or the doctor goes, you don't know what you're talking about, Grok. I've been doing this for 30 years. You're missing the boat here. And they don't do the treatment that's being told, or the reverse, they do, and they were told not to. What is the standard of care now that we're going to apply to that, and whether or not it's been breached or not? Or a radiologist misses the cancer that AI was pointing to the whole time, saying there's cancer, there's cancer, there's cancer, and the radiologist just didn't do it. And somebody, has stage 4 a year later because the radiologist wouldn't listen to Gen AI telling it we have cancer right there. The other flip side of it is from from a practitioner perspective, a legal practitioner's perspective. Are we going to have the public defenders who aren't using Gen AI to go through all of the jailhouse calls and go through all the body cam footage? Are they going to now have claims of ineffective assistance of counsel for failing to use Gen AI tools and to Strickland test? Does that do it for us, or does it not? What about the prosecution? What if they rely upon it too much in Brady disclosures and they go, Judge, Gen AI didn't see the Brady disclosure. I told it to find any and all evidence that was not good for the state. What is the judge going to do? Am I going to hold you accountable for a Brady violation because your Gen AI tool didn't pick it up? These are things that are going to, from a professional services, if you will, standard breaches, we're going to have to start considering more and more.
Yeah, those are great points. I mean, if you think about one of the most foundational bedrock principles in society for purposes of kind of legal frameworks, it's the notion of duty, right? What's your duty? The breach, right? And the causation. That's a very sort of standard framework. Maybe the framework needs to change at some point. Maybe at some point that has those very, very foundational frameworks start to have to mold to sort of fit the environment. And, to your point, perhaps new duties arise in the face of emerging technologies that provide a different level of assistance and information. Do new duties sort of spring into being as a result? There's lots to contend with there. Um, so to that point, I mean, obviously courts around the country, there's thousands of courts around the country, right, helping to sort of reshape this landscape, as you mentioned, as these cases start popping up. Um, how do you feel about sort of the decision making that's happening at all parts of the country potentially not finding sort of consistency with one another, and these frameworks sort of popping up sporadically and individually and for certain industries and not in others? Do you think that's going to create issues in terms of people knowing what duties to satisfy? I want to stay away from sort of the regulatory piece of it and focus just on sort of what happens in terms of different judges around the country making different decisions about these issues.
Yeah, I mean that happens today. I don't see it as any different, and it just has to play itself out. It's the way the justice system works. Something new pops up, people don't really know what to make of it, and so we start handling it more and more and more. More rulings come out, more decisions are made, more appeals are taken, and it just kind of works it through the system. Your circuit might see it differently than my circuit, and that's going to take 3 or 4 years. Then it's going to go to SCOTUS, and then we'll have decisions there. So I just think it's going to take the normal course. These are just really big questions now, and really interesting questions that we've never really contemplated and thought of. And my gosh, in 2 years, everything in my brain is going to be blown, because I'll be like, I could never have seen that one coming. This whole agentic AI and what that's doing right now, I have no idea what the world's going to look like when this MCP standard is adopted and everybody is having agents going back and forth amongst all these different systems, making decisions for everyone. That's going to be interesting.
And that's what I worry about a little bit, because I agree with you. I mean, to some extent, it's no different than what we deal with now, right? There's a circuit split, it gets resolved, but to your point, that can take a very long time, and the pace at which AI is developing and the stakes at issue as that AI develops in bigger and more powerful ways seem so high that I worry we won't be able to keep up, right? That sort of normal process that we go through to create some semblance of a body of case law is maybe too slow for the pace that we're dealing with when it comes to AI.
Well, maybe I'll build a panel of Judge Schlegel bots, and I'll make the decisions and let you know pretty quickly.
Yeah, maybe. I think the point you're making there is we don't have a good answer. I totally agree with you. I mean, what do you do with that?
Right.
So, I do think one of the most important things we can do in light of that as judges is just to stay informed. I mean, to stay on top of this. It's a lot to stay on top of, and not everybody, has the time or even the desire, right, to try to stay on top of all of it. But I do try to listen to podcasts and read articles and have conversations like this. What's your way of staying on top of things? How do you kind of stay in the know enough to be prepared to make those good decisions when they come to you?
Same thing. I jump on all the different platforms and see what's going on, read all the different articles, subscribe to AI newsletters of people that are much more smarter than I am, and understand, as we were talking earlier, a lot of this stuff goes over my head, but enough goes into my head where I'm like, I should probably get curious about that and start asking a bunch of questions.
Yeah. And it works the other way too. I think we have some sort of practical insights to offer the folks who are doing the deep work. And I say that I was recently at a conference in Chicago, the Law and Society Association conference, and a lot of academics are working on issues that impact the judiciary and going and doing sort of deep dives on these issues. But I think it's helpful to have both sides of it, right? The deep dive academic perspective that really looks at things closely, and then kind of the boots on the ground folks like us who are seeing disputes on a day-to-day basis, who are starting to grapple with some of this technology, whether it's through the lawyers using it in our courtroom or us in chambers. I kind of like that sort of synergy of those two worlds. Do you agree with that? Do you feel like there's another perspective that needs to be in the mix as well? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you. I mean, I was just on a panel at the U.S. Fifth Circuit's conference, and it was a practitioner, a judge, and an academic. And it was a great debate between myself and the academic. It's like, yeah, I know it's possible. I hear you. I get it. But I've been living and breathing this place for a long, long time, and that's not how the world works. And not only does it not how it works, I don't think it should work that way. I mean, human judgment is far too important to me. I don't care if your bot can do it better. I don't care if you can figure it out. I'm never looking at mom in the face while I'm up on the bench saying, "So sorry," as I said before, I used the wrong LLM, and you don't get your kids for the next 6 months. I don't care. It's never going to happen. That part of the justice system is being able to say Judge Schlegel's the worst judge that ever existed. I disagree with everything that he has said. He missed the boat on this one. I'm going to take him up. That's important.
I wonder if you were talking to the same academic I was talking to, who was sharing that perspective that perhaps these AI systems can do some of our work better because they can be more consistent. They can pull from a larger base of sources. They don't get tired. They don't have bad days, right? And she was backing it up with research that she had done. She has a psychological background. Where studies that she was conducting and overseeing showed that sometimes judges think they're doing one thing and are actually doing something different. And so that sort of inconsistency between their ideal, work approach versus their actual approach can create issues in the justice system. And can AI somehow come in and be helpful in that respect? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, can AI, short of taking over judicial decision making, can AI be helpful to judges and create more consistency and give us better access to resources?
That's a both. That's a yes and a no. Again, whose singularity are you building? Whose consistency are you building? There are so many factors out there that you can't build a tech for every single justice system, every individual justice system. And who are you? There's a reason why we have a representative government. It's represented by the people of that community. It's not represented by the AI people who are building these AI tools. And so, yes, it can be useful and helpful. Yes, it can help us find those cases that, are directly on point. Yes, it can assist us with, hey, have you thought of this? But it's you who are the ones that are thinking about it. And the danger that I always tell judges, do not use Gen AI to get past the white page problem. Fight with it, struggle with it, think through it. That is your job. That is the social contract that we have with our communities and with the public. Fight through it, write something, get through the hump. And then if you want to use Gen AI to help you think through it a little bit more, or tighten up a paragraph, or see if you missed something, I'm all for it. But these tools are so good, and it goes to the over-reliance piece, that the bot will be directing you towards an answer as opposed to you directing the bot towards the right answer. And so it is a nuance, but a very important one that we really need to be careful about, especially the judges. Again, you're a lawyer, use it all day, every day. That's up to you. But if you're a judge, there is a difference between a final judgment that has precedential value and controlling this case versus a hallucination in a motion to compel. Who cares?
Okay. So let me before we close out, I want to touch on one other topic, because we've been talking about sort of, AI use in the legal profession, judges, chambers, lawyers, but what about people? I mean, clearly a theme running through your comments is we want to do better for the people we serve, right? We want to do right by the people that we serve. That's clear, I think, in every conversation I've ever had with you. So talk to me about access to justice. Does AI potentially open up doors that couldn't have been opened before? Are pro se litigants better served because of these tools? And is this something that you see real promise in terms of access to justice?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big question on the UPL issue that I'm not going to discuss, and we don't have time to discuss the UPL issue. But just from the perspective of delivery of services to everybody, every courthouse across the country has all the different handbooks and forms for name changes, for protective orders, for all these things that happen all day, every day. Why don't we have Gen AI run a tool, update these manuals, update these forms, make sure they're readable, make sure they're understandable, put together a quick deepfake video of an avatar in any race, language, sex that you want, put it on your website and help people walk through the system. Why are we not sending text and email reminders with AI built into case management systems so that if Scott has a court date coming up, we get the court date, we have a link, I can actually interact with the bot. Who am I in front of again? What's the name of my lawyer? What is their phone number? What time do I have to be there? What's the charge again? I mean, there's simple things that we can do today that actually just helps people through the justice system that are very low hanging fruit that won't cost too much money and will actually change and improve the accessibility of the justice system. I mean, imagine getting a link going, here's the address, here's the time, here's the phone number, just push here and it'll take you there. Thank you.
Right. And I would go a step further and say the accessibility is improved, but also the overall experience, which I think really helps with that sort of public confidence, public trust, right? Feeling good about the justice system, which is really important, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Before AI, my shtick was reduce barriers because how people feel about the justice system matters. It really matters.
Couldn't agree more. All right. Well, we're going to close up, and I am hoping that you can sum up your approach to AI in one sentence. I know you have lots of thoughts on it, but try to sort of sum it up in one sentence, your overall perspective on AI in our justice system.
It is scary, powerful, and it's either going to help us or hurt us depending upon the user.
I love it. It's very similar to how I think about it, which is, the question isn't what can AI do, but what should AI do? That's the question we have to constantly be asking ourselves right now. So much is happening. We need to keep that as sort of our guiding light. Awesome conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. I loved it. Always love talking to you. Thanks for sharing all your thoughts.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both, Judge Braswell and Judge Schlegel. I know I've had a lot to think about, and it's been very, very interesting to me. And I hope our listeners will continue to join us as we continue our discussions on how AI is helping us court change.
I'd like to thank Judge Braswell, Judge Schlegel, and Rabia for taking the time to speak with us today. There is, of course, a lot changing. And as that change occurs, now is the time to begin educating ourselves and preparing for the potential of that more equitable, tech-enabled future. Thank you, as always, for joining us for Clarity on Tech, powered by the Thomson Reuters Institute. You can follow or subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and don't forget to share with your colleagues and leave a 5-star review. For more data-driven analysis of today's professional services market and in-depth conversations with industry thought leaders, visit us online at thomsonreuters.com/institute and follow us on LinkedIn under the Thomson Reuters Institute. Clarity on Tech is a production of Thomson Reuters, copyright Thomson Reuters 2025.